Thank you, Pier Vittorio, for this amazing introduction and the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you all for being here, despite that I just found out it's kind of an open week or a very stressful week before submissions. So I'm happy to present the research that I carried out as a postdoctoral fellow at the Architectures of Order Research Cluster at the Goethe University Frankfurt, and is entitled "The Housing Question is a Feminist Question, Housing Commons for the New Woman of the German Werkbund." This research operates, as Pier Vittorio said, at the intersection of feminist studies, architectural history, and the commons discourse as a way to contribute to discussing and conceptualizing non-hierarchical forms of collective living. So first, I would like to describe how this project sits within my work. So I'm going to contextualize a bit. So the commons discourse, one of the pillars of the research, is the umbrella under which my research and teaching at the Architectural Association has been carried out. The discourse, of course, is not new, but there is a currently developing field around it as a political, social, and spatial response to a critique of capitalism, and particularly the predicament of contemporary housing with which my PhD research is concerned. My PhD thesis is entitled "We Have Never Been Private, the Housing Project in Neoliberal Europe." And it puts forward a critique to the privileged exclusionary notion of the private in neoliberal housing, both as an institutional issue linked to private property and a typological issue linked to the extreme individualization of housing units. So, accompanied by a design project for an administrative and typological intervention to a community settlement in Athens, the thesis relocates domestic privacy within practices of sharing and the design of the urban housing commons, so to speak. In parallel, I have been teaching a history and theory course at the AA entitled "Concepts of Domesticity." This offers genealogies of concepts that have diachronically governed the spatial configuration of domesticity, such as the private, the interior, and the common. When it comes to the common, it studies the application of the principle of the common as a principle to 20th century pioneering movements that approach domestic models as laboratories for social models. And opening up the framework to experiments around the globe, not just in Europe, has aimed at challenging the canons of the modern Western paradigm of domesticity, which has also been a way to respond to claims and requests by the student community that we need to hear beyond the Western paradigm. And also is a way to trace a circularity of concepts around the world. I mean, how one feeds back to the other and it's not an invention in a certain place or in a certain context. So since I finished the PhD, I have been further researching housing commons as an enabling framework for a feminist critique. And I employ the theoretical framing of feminism by Silvia Federici and Maria Mies that recognizes the capitalist and patriarchal oppression of women through the burden of reproductive labor in the nuclear family apartment type that was mass-produced in the 20th century. And therefore, they both support the liberation of women through collective living forms. Within this framework, in the past year, I have published research that analyzes the challenges of the commons, of course, and within the neoliberal context, but also highlights possibilities in unacknowledged contributions of women in the shaping of the ethics of cooperative living. Women both as designers and planners, but also as residents, that show how the design and practice of the commons can redefine accessibility to and equality in urban living. And so now we come to the fellowship research, which is also part of my teaching contribution to the master program in history and critical thinking at the AA. So I investigate the feminist struggle for commons in the context of the emergence of the new woman in the Weimar Republic at the beginning of the 20th century. My methodology includes both a historical and a typological reading, which unveils processes of women organizing in social movements and in collective endeavors to generate collective domestic organizations and to support their emancipation against the patriarchal status quo of the time. As case studies, I have investigated 2 collective living models designed by women in the 1910s, where I trace the radical ways in which claims and demands for a feminist order entered design processes and a formal movement concerned with modern housing, which is the Werkbund, as Pier Vittorio said. The link between the emergence of feminist struggles and women's housing initiatives in the Weimar Republic at the turn of the 20th century is accurately documented by Ulla Terlinden and Susanna von Ortzen in this book, from which I have borrowed the title. In German reads "The Housing Question is a Feminist Question," and they write, "The development of new forms of living, women's homes and cooperatives, student dormitories, 1- or 2-room apartments for single women, manifested a gradually changing image of women, a life beyond rigid family and kinship structures made conceivable." As early as 1910, women throughout Europe and in Germany were demonstrating for equal rights. In Germany, it was in 1919 when Article 109 of the Weimar Constitution stated that men and women have the same fundamental rights and duties as citizens, including the right to vote and hold office. By that time, the position of women in the workforce had changed, and they began to take on new kinds of jobs that have previously been dominated by men. All in all, more than 11 million women were employed in Germany in 1918, accounting for 36% of the workforce. There was an unprecedented number. This became possible by the first generations of women admitted to higher education. Sorry, this blocks the view. Admitted to higher education and granted license to practice, an achievement accomplished through the claims of the women's movement, which took on the character of a pedagogical reform as well. The working women's movement supported the changing position of women in society by promoting themes linked to all women's lives, das gesamte Frauenleben in German. So this means to applying to the whole span of a woman's life within a new social, professional, and living culture. Emily Winkelmann, the first registered freelance woman architect in Germany, who designed one of my 2 case studies, writes in her article, "The Woman Architect and Engineer" in 1913, about the challenges of women architects. In architecture and engineering, women have the same study opportunities as men. Only in the profession, state careers are closed to them at the moment, so that they are dependent on private employment or self-employment. Anyone who thinks of becoming an independent architect, that is, accepting commissions and carrying them out under their own responsibility, should be trained to reliably relieve their boss from the practical and highly undesirable tasks of drafting, estimating costs, and managing construction. Only a completely reliable personality will receive private commissions, which as a woman in the architectural profession is still an exception. And this is what she can largely rely on rather than winning the competition, in which, as in all subjects, chances are low due to great supply. And I find there's an interesting parallel here in this advertisement of the time between the woman in the advertisement and the brand that is advertised, because, and I read the advertisement, they both should be reliable and technically highly accomplished, both women and the objects. So the challenges in the workplace were addressed along with the housing question from within the feminist quest for emancipation. Women who by choice or necessity led single and professional lifestyles could not anymore fit in the 2 domestic models available to them, the paternal or the marital home, and required new typologies of living. Following the example of the English working girls' clubs and women's settlements, in the first years of the movement, homes were founded that offered home economics and shoeing lessons with the aim to increase the training of women workers so that they could free themselves from their helplessness and the confines of the home. A wealth of feminist newspapers emerged at the time and published themes such as housing need and housing reform, centralized housekeeping and living standards, institutional residencies and housing inspection, women architects and housing projects for women. And all these press initiatives were supported by the Federation of German Women's Associations. So it's important that at the time, German women's associations around the Weimar Republic were unionized and they had their own federation, like a central organ, which was unfortunately dissolved in 1933 due to the political situation. And we can see in this graph that the publication periods, most of them end in this year. So they advertised jobs for women and housing for single women at different life phases, young, mature, and aging. So from student dormitories to cooperatives for women workers and retirement homes, which produced an intoxicating sense of freedom in the big cities for intellectual and professional women. Psychologist Alice Rule-Gerstel observed, women began to cut an entirely new figure, a new economic figure who went out into public economic life as an independent worker or wage earner, entering the free market that had up until then been only free for men. A new political figure who appeared in parties and parliaments, at demonstrations and gatherings. A new physical figure who not only cut her hair and shortened her skirts, but began to emancipate herself altogether from the physical limitations of being female. Finally, a new intellectual psychological figure who fought her way out of the fog of sentimental ideologies and strove toward a clear objective knowledge of the world and the self. The morality of this new woman against the sanctity of marriage and motherhood was at the heart of German debates, not only about social stability and national identity, but also about modern aesthetics. The female claims to cultural authority and professional practice formed a kind of agency that affected the Werkbund. During the organization's formative years, from its founding in 1907 to its major design exhibition of 1914 in Cologne. During this period, the Werkbund, which was an association of artists, architects, entrepreneurs, and craftsmen who identified as a cultural and aesthetic reform movement, became entangled with these changes in gender roles in order to address a new discourse on living culture, Wohnkultur. So it was, again, a larger project. And promoted worker apartments and cooperatives, so different typologies for living. The voices of women in their quest for self-agency in this aesthetic creation of everyday life or living culture, were more and more expressed in exhibitions, fairs, conferences, and publications. Of course, they were not always welcomed by formal movements in heavily male-dominated circles. In fact, the Werkbund ideology was initially born out of the need to save the German culture from the bric-a-brac. The bric-a-brac was an arts fair held in the Berlin Secession Gallery by the Women's Employment Association, which was an organization that promoted economic opportunities for working women. Despite the intimacy and coziness of the exhibition, the excess, heterogeneity, and disorder in the display of exhibits were considered by many in design reform circles to be typically feminine vices that had no place in a formal style. Female contributions to the design of a new living culture were also pioneered and advocated at the 1912 monumental women's exhibition called Women at Home and at Work, organized by the Lyceum Club in Berlin, which was an organization made up only by academic and professional women architects. Gertrude Bäumer, who was director of the Federation of German Women's Associations that year, highlighted in the journal Die Frau the domestic interior designs, such as the one you can see displayed at the exhibition. And she thought of them as a public statement about a new professional relationship between women and the home, where education in all branches of women's work was central. So the fact that this was the product of women's education and professional work. The aim was to stress women's determination, and I quote, to strive for a deep and fundamental knowledge to foster efficiency, clarity, and truth, as Rose Senchi-Hale wrote at Die Welt der Frau in 1912. So already, I mean, the discourse was infiltrated by the Werkbund discourse. So it was projected to women that they should be after efficiency, clarity, and truth, the new objectivity that was put forward by the Werkbund. These claims contributed to shaping the, it was mutual. They also contributed to shaping the Werkbund's central design principles of quality and objectivity, which culminated at the Werkbund exhibition of 1914 in Cologne. And within the exhibition's original intention to act as a showcase of the products of German art industries, women architects and artists envisioned their role as creators of a new aesthetic culture of the everyday life that combined design reform theories with the applied arts, and of course the claims of the women's movement. This new understanding that I have now contextualized a bit, hopefully, I have attempted to examine closely in my two case studies, the House of the Woman and the House in the Sun, both realized in 1914, which is considered like the year of culmination before the downhill, let's say. Through their historical and typological reading, I aim to explore the capacity of these early architectures of the Werkbund to challenge the role of women in society and the domestic realm through a social and spatial reconfiguration of housing. Despina Stratigakos, researcher of the female question in the Weimar Republic, argues that the range of housing alternatives for women started decreasing already from 1913 onwards to 1932. So that's why I'm saying this is considered the peak of female experiments on women's housing. And this made me want to inquire this early experimentation period of the 1910s before housing became again prototyped according to the nuclear family apartment type model that was mass produced in the industry in the decades that followed, for which the German context is very famous, but I see there's more radicality in these very early experiments. So the first case study, the House of the Woman, at the Werkbund exhibition of 1914 in Cologne, was intended as a showcase of the achievements of its female members in the applied arts. You should remember that it's the first generation of women admitted to higher education, a first generation of professional women architects. So it was somehow dedicated to them. Particular focus was placed in the exclusive authorship of women from the conceptual origin to the manual labor of artistic production. So everything conceived and made by women. And this was a way to establish their position as intellectual creators, which was considered until then a masculine domain. So women could only be involved in, let's say, perhaps manual labor, but not creative labor. So it's indicative of the role of women in the design reform movement. The location of their pavilion in the urban layout of the exhibition. It was placed, and if I can show you, it was placed in a square attached to the main hall square at the end of the main exhibition route. So can you see my cursor? Yeah. So this is the main square, and this square here is attached to the main square. So it's like a big L square. And here is number 29. Can you see? Yeah. Yeah. So number 29 is the woman's pavilion. And it was, it was framing the square, which had the entries of all the leading Werkbund figures as a way to show they were equal. So we can see Walter Gropius's factory administration building with number 36, and Henry van de Velde's theater with number 31. The theater is here. And Peter Behrens's festival hall with number 28 should be this one. So they this one. So they framed this square. According to the exhibition's retrospective review, Deutsche Werkkunst in 1916, the area between the theater, the factory, and the House of the Woman is probably the best spot in the exhibition city. So it was like a gallery. Additionally, to the importance of the location, a perspective opened up from the Gropius building to the Lower Rhine village. So like here, like a street running from the square to the embankment of Rhine River here, which revealed gradually the rear garden terrace of the pavilion as part of the design of the embankment, which constituted the facade of the exhibition city from across the Rhine. So it was also in a prominent spot from across the river. The official catalogue of the exhibition stated that it is the first time that a special house is made available to women at an exhibition and only to women working in the arts and crafts field, and that this should only be a milestone in the development of this female profession, which has only existed for a few decades. A special journal issue on arts and crafts for the housing culture stated that it is a testament to the high esteem in which women's work is held, that within this very demanding framework, a house of their own is made available to them, a house built according to a woman's design. So it was almost scandalous, a woman's design. And this woman was Margaret Knuppelholz-Rosa, an architect and artist trained in Magdeburg, Stuttgart, and Breslau, and practicing in Berlin, who received the first prize in a competition open to German and Austrian women architects for the design of this pavilion. I can only highlight her name because she doesn't appear anywhere. She's like a phantom. But there were more women involved, of course. There was an organizing committee consisting of Anna Mutesius as director, Else Opla-Legband as executive director, and Lily Reich as general secretary. Their backgrounds in fashion and costume design, interior architecture, and decoration contributed to the Werkbund as a reform movement on all aspects of everyday life. The stark physical appearance of the House of the Woman signaled this new female discipline embodying, of course, the Werkbund's guiding principles, strict objectivity, precise treatment of the material, and beauty in the forms of expression. The pavilion was a low tripartite structure characterized by serene horizontality, clear articulation of rectilinear forms, and symmetry. So all the Werkbund principles. From the front, a striking feature was the total absence of windows, ornamentation, and rounded elements, except for the friezes of the gates that were in blue ceramic tile, and the trees. But the rest was like this, let's say, austere structure. This exterior austerity was a statement against derogatory gender assumptions of women's nature as prone to decorations and ornaments that were considered household junk. It was therefore a statement on the role of women in modern society, as read the slogan on the frieze above the entrance, the role of women in modern society. And at the same time, the building's classicizing exterior design, which was entirely determined by the interior layout, was a tribute to a modern and timeless functionalism, which at the same time addressed the needs of modern women. So one could say that this type stood as the Werkbund's representation of social and domestic restructuring. So it was a symbol of continuity, but also of progress, like combined. In other words, it was a bit instrumentalized by the Werkbund. The fact that they invited women, it was helping to spread the ideology. Against the social order centered at the woman's reproductive role in the family, this 30-room building celebrated the display of practicing women's life and work, a modern feminine living culture, which according to the official catalogue, complements the strict objectivity of the woman's house with the art of hospitality, artistic events with traditional domestic practice extrapolated on a collective scale. So visitors entered through an entrance hall, which acted as the entry point to a circuit of rooms, variously sized rooms, around the central core. The central core are numbers 29, 30, and 31. And at the center of this core was a large square room designed by Opla Werkbund, so number 30, which opened up on the left to a tea room and on the right to a theater stage, and was intended for social functions, shows, and performances organized by a special committee of women from Cologne. Men who wrote reviews of the exhibition at the time were surprised to see in this central space, and I quote, "Instead of areas traditionally occupied by women, like fashion and decoration, is another area conspicuously developed with a relatively large number of living, sleeping, and reading rooms designed by women." So it was surprising that women were able to design living spaces. Among the few surviving images of these interiors, because the pavilion was down the year after, I don't know why, is one of a library designed by Alexe Altenkirch, a Cologne-based artist, and one of a dining room designed by Anne-Marie Moldenhauer, a designer from Offenbach. They reveal the conviction of women to design domestic interiors according to the modernist aesthetics, and as the official catalogue states, it is precisely here that it should be shown that women know how to make living spaces comfortable. And I should add to that collective living spaces for energetic working women who challenged social conventions by pursuing higher education and careers. So there's nothing really traditionally domestic about this model here. Not the traditional, let's say, practices or uses of a home. It's just dedicated to women and the coming together of women and celebration of women's life and work that is not revolving around the family. The exhibition rooms, as I said, they were called by Opla Werkbund purely practical section. They were arranged around this active social core in the middle. And you can even see the arrangement of some shop windows here. They were part of the exhibition. Items displayed were classified according to the genre and exhibited women's design and craftsmanship in interior decoration and scenography, plastic art and ceramics, applied graphics, tapestry, embroidery, clothing, painting, photography, poster art and advertising work, books, drawing and handwork in schools, basketry and toys, jewelry and metal, and even architecture models. Thus, a broad panorama of women's artistic production surrounded a hub of collective life at the center of the pavilion. Opla Werkbund highlighted that each department should act not as an austere exhibition object, but rather as a space formed with love and care, so that the true female gift to animate and make space livable is expressed. True femininity, that is the general motto for the whole undertaking. So it's a reconceptualization of what femininity is about. And this true femininity was presented as a balance between two complementary qualities: objectivity and professionalism in artistic creation, comfort and hospitality in domestic living. And each of these two was posited as integral to the other in the creation of the modern home and the role of the woman in it. And that is why the House of the Woman exemplified the Werkbund's conception of living culture. This is just a sculpture by another artist that was placed, a Polish artist that was placed in the rear garden. And it's, of course, very sculptic of the destiny of women, like revolutionizing what is the destiny of women. My second case study, The House in the Sun, was designed in 1913 and built in 1914 by Emily Winkelmann, who is considered the first freelance woman architect in Germany, although she didn't manage to officially finish her higher education at Hanover's Technical College. Because as I said, it was the decade before women were permitted to study, actually. And she somehow, it's an interesting story, how she sneaked into the school, but she could not be granted officially the diploma. She had been running a successful office in Berlin since 1907, which was the first architectural firm owned by a woman and employing only female architects. By that time, she was employing like 16 women architects. Her firm gradually built a reputation from a broad spectrum of realized projects. On the one hand, private villas and cottages in the country house style of the time, which was particularly influenced by Hermann Muthesius. On the other hand, public programs, such as a theater, a hospital, and a girls' school in Aachen. Winkelmann's conscious involvement in commissions by women's organizations started in 1912, when she presented over 30 of her projects at the section Women in Architecture of the exhibition The Woman at Home and at Work in Berlin, which I mentioned earlier. The German Lyceum Women's Club that organized this exhibition had set itself the task of involving women in projects as part of a social policy. So this time the women's movement is taking up space in Berlin, and they're claiming their own presence, and they involved also women in the design and in the realization of this project as part of a consistent policy, not just single projects. As a member of the Lyceum Club herself, Winkelmann started taking up projects initiated by the German women's associations that introduced radical new types of architecture to represent women's changing lifestyles and their increasing or stronger presence in urban life. And among these types was housing for single working women and accommodation for retired women. This is just important because, as I said, these women's associations, they made their presence felt in the city by organizing symposiums. They even formed the party to get in the parliament. I mean, they were very active. In 1914, Winkelmann was established as one of the leading designers of the women's movement, with 3 housing designs that she submitted within the same year. One won the 3rd prize in the competition for the House of the Woman at the Werkbund exhibition in Cologne that we saw earlier. She won the 3rd prize here in the previous competition. The second one won the 1st prize for the House of the Woman at the International Book and Graphic Arts exhibition in Leipzig, for which she received a gold medal. And you can see the 1st prize here, the winning entry. And the 3rd one was the House in the Sun, an architectural and socio-historical monument to the homonymous women's movement. It was called House in the Sun, which was inspired by a very influential novel by Carl Larsson. He was a Scandinavian author, and he wrote this novel about how life should be and how living should be. The construction and administration of the building was provided by the Cooperative for Women's Homesteads, founded in 1912 by the Pestalozzi-Frobel House. The Pestalozzi-Frobel House was a school that had been training women for professional careers since the 1870s, so for about 40 years prior to that. The cooperative was modeled according to a precedent of a retirement home for teachers in Pankow, another area in Berlin, which was considered an indisputable success in responding to a housing need for single women as social policy rather than charity. So it was a generation of female teachers that were retired and they had no place to live. So it was inspired by this successful example. The Cooperative for Women's Homesteads that was formed gradually acquired 2 acres in Neubabelsberg-Novaves, that's the area in Potsdam, Berlin, which is a suburb of Berlin. And it acquired this land from the Association for Institutional Homes and built the first house in 1914 dedicated to providing healthy, pleasant, and inexpensive dwellings for educated, working, or retired single women. So it was not very strict to whom it was addressed. It was to the whole spectrum of women, like either working women or retired women. And the opening lines of an article about this project capture its essence. What more could one wish than a quiet, comfortable home for the working woman who often has to work from dawn to dusk and has no close relatives with whom to unite in shared domesticity? And yet she cannot do it so easily. Even when she has grown old and wants to retire from the hustle of her busy life, it is difficult for her to live comfortably with limited means and to maintain a certain degree of independence without being doomed to complete loneliness. Winkelmann had been involved from the earliest stages of the cooperative, of the formation of the cooperative, participating in the working committee that devised the initial plans. So she actually fought, she was kind of an activist at this point for these projects to be able to be realized. And the domestic model for the cooperative's idea of a genuine rather than an institutional home for women was the villa. It's kind of a let's say anecdote. The selection of a site in a green suburb, which was close to Berlin, but still it was a suburb, was aimed at occupants who wished to conclude the autumn of their life in tranquility and comfort, but at the same time have hardly given up on life and can easily reach the city. So it was also a way to redefine the suburb. What is the suburb and how can housing be there? This claim, as you can understand, required Winkelmann's design to accommodate all sorts of contrasts, a modernizing classicism and a comforting vernacular, an urban type and a countryside style, the proximity to the city and the natural surroundings of the suburb. And on the one hand, the building demonstrated an almost completely unadorned exterior with simple forms and masses that, okay, they might produce a kind of a monumentality, but it's, let's say, simple. At the same time, this classicism was tempered by vernacular elements of domesticity and tradition. We shouldn't forget we're in a suburb, and that's why I show this image, because these are the neighboring houses, and the one is in the background, the house in the sun. So the facade had these roof lines and the red tiles and flower boxes and window shutters and pergolas and fencing, all these vernacular, let's say, elements. There were 14 apartments on 3 floors, and they vary from 1 to 3 rooms. Each one had its own entrance hall, kitchenette, loggia, and toilet. The largest units were equipped with baths, while the others shared a bathroom located on each floor. In line with its modern inhabitants, the house boasted the latest conveniences that other Berliners lacked, and these were central heating, hot water, and electric lighting, all these in 1914. Each resident could prepare her own meals at the apartment kitchenettes that I've marked on each floor. Or as Maria Sulce wrote in her article, every woman could spare herself the trouble of cooking and take her meal in company, thereby passing a pleasant hour in conversation at the central dining room on the ground floor. So where this option of served meals was offered, and that was the so-called centrale, which encapsulated this balance between independence and sharing, solitude and community that made the home so successful, because it was very successful. It was the first house in a row, then other extensions were designed. A couple of caretakers who lived in an apartment on the ground floor were also available to help with housekeeping and cleaning. And the concept was that women are not solely responsible for the housekeeping. And it was an affordable combination of individual living situation and communal togetherness and care that was the home's ethic. Flexibility was incorporated into the design of the dwellings in the form of a loggia. Unfortunately, it's the only image that I could find, but you can see the loggia here, like 3 windows or here. And these windows could, of course, open or even disappear into the ledge and transform the space as desired, from completely open balcony to a sheltered winter garden. And the loggia integrated those natural elements of light and green environment and air that were central to Larsson's novel, where he shared this idealized vision of domestic health and happiness. And they were also free, these women, to choose their own decoration. And the other important aspect of this experiment, the cooperative, just to say a few things about it, it worked on the basis of a membership of 200 marks that turned members into shareholders. However, it could not survive only on membership, so it got additional support by donations from professional women's associations and national pension funds that made it possible to maintain the social policy, not to increase the rent and not to evict struggling women. Because these women, they were not rich, they were working women, but struggling or retired women, they did not have like high incomes or anything like that. And as a model of domestic independence, but also security, it became an inspiration not only to Winkelmann, who brought a personal interest into the project as herself a single working woman in her late 30s at the time, but also for the creation of sister settlements in Cologne, Hamburg, and Hanover. Because of its success, it was franchised somehow. In conclusion, I think both these examples can be read as an introduction to a modern domestic project, specifically as an attempt to signal to German society that there was an expanded public and domestic realm that encompassed this new woman. And at the same time, they act as forerunners of apartment design in the decades that followed. But in contrast with later housing models, I believe that these radical experiments revealed the possibilities that emerged from social movements and cooperative networks and collective spatial orders to cater for women's various life phases and styles that go beyond the role of the wife or the caretaker or the housekeeper. And after all, the potential of collective living beyond the nuclear family domesticity, which Maria Mies considers an internal colony of patriarchy. And by establishing links between female emancipation, housing typology, and the commons ideology, I think they highlight the potential of spatial orders to make new social orders conceivable. And thus they can help us conceptualize the 21st century feminist discourse and housing commons discourse as a joint between historical versatility and contemporary relevance. I will close this presentation with the closing lines of this article about the house in the sun as part of the cooperative for women's homesteads. There is also social potential here. Organizations can purchase share certificates for their members. Share certificates can be subscribed as gifts for underprivileged women. What it means for a woman whose deadline is based on her gainful employment to be able to claim an apartment, at least in her old age. Perhaps those women who do not yet have this prospect today will only know in full. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ioanna, for this wonderful presentation. which I think touches many topics that we have been discussed also in our laboratory, but also I think in general in the school. And I think what is really for me important, and is a very good example for the doctoral students. But I think that what you presented are very specific case studies where there is a very strong architectural elaboration. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that what is really at stake in these two projects would be, especially in the first one, also because the nature of the exhibition, but also in the second one, is to attack the idea of the house as a private space, to make the house as kind of public, a public space. I mean, for example, it's interesting that in the first example, there is this emphasis on programs that are usually the more public spaces of the house, no? So rather than looking to more private. So I want you to elaborate on that, on the publicity, let's say, of this kind of architecture. I mean, it seems that in a way they are really trying to open up the house, you know, as a public space.
Yes, I think absolutely, and that's why I think I stressed it many times in my presentation. I think that is because it became part of a larger discourse of how to introduce a new role of the woman also in the public realm through the housing, through the domestic realm. And that is the most radical for me. And of course, I chose the second example, which I understand what you mean, and it is true, is not so radical in terms of the program, but I present it because it's radical in terms of the framework, the administrative framework, the formation of cooperatives that enabled women to be able to claim at least an option for housing. And as for the first example, I think it was also part of a new conceptualization of the role of the woman and the importance of higher education and professionalization of women as a way to question established and indoctrinated ideas of what the relationship between woman and housing is, and completely revolutionize this thinking. Like housing could be for women whatever they chose it to be. Part of their professional career, part of their life in a broader sense. Yes, beyond established roles and beyond also the confines that were also financial.
Actually, another interesting aspect that is also very, very architectural. I mean, one of the topics we have discussed a lot recently is the question of time and what I can call typological design. So design that is really trying to focus on like manipulating existing typologies to achieve something new, something different. And this seems to me really another thing at stake, especially in the second example, because in a way this building is a villa, but it's not really a villa, it's an urban villa, it's almost like an apartment building. So it seems to me that one of the fundamental contribution, let's say, of this approach is really typological invention, like to design something that resembles something that, of course, typology cannot be invented from scratch, but there is a high degree of invention.
Yes, thank you for this comment, because actually gives me the opportunity to elaborate a bit on something else that is important. The women's movement in Germany at the time was very much influenced by the women's movement in the UK, by women workers, mine workers there, I mean, there was a suffrage movement around Europe, also in Paris at the same time. But what was also kind of imported to the Weimar Republic were models somehow inspired from the new towns. So from the Garden City movement in England. And they formed what was called, and it's interesting, women's colonies in the German countryside before they were somehow institutionalized or professionalized in the cities. And you know better than me, perhaps the countryside is where things start before the city. And they were called women's colonies, probably because people hadn't seen that before. And also perhaps because land was more cheaper or more available there. And that is why it is important that Winkelmann was inspired by these settlements and tried to incorporate things, and also in the social policy. So the land, as I said, the land had to be acquired, and it was acquired through the cooperative that was formed for that purpose. And so it's very important that it was an instrument that could put pressure on institutional bodies, like government bodies, like the one I mentioned. It was an association for institutional homes. And until that point, women could only claim to get to institutional retirement homes, which were these depressing environments. And so the social policy is important to get away from the charity and be able to claim the land, and then to be able to hire the architect who will design for women and take into consideration also typological concerns. Winkelmann was also, typologically speaking, influenced by Hermann Muthesius in this style he introduced, also coming back from London, like this broader design reform that he introduced also through his wife. And Lily Reich was, I mean, all these women were, it was the first generation of women who were educated with these figures, like having them as professors. So they had all types of associations with them. So I'm not implying by any chance that they were anyway promoted for reasons other than the right ones, but I'm just saying that at this point it was still a heavily male-dominated environment, and women, it wasn't easy for women still to go forward with these claims and actually win them.
It's really amazing to see, because there's been a lot of discussion in the last years about women architects, and I mean, what is interesting is that there are actually women architects, but actually what is really interesting here is that they're designing projects for women. So it's not like the women architect design anybody else. So there is a very strong professional claim, but this professional claim is in support of the dweller. There is also a woman. So there is it's a very strong project. I think stronger than maybe projects that are more recent, where maybe we have the women architect, but then she designed the museum in Qatar.
No, I get it.
Everybody has the right to design whatever they want.
No, I get it. Actually, for me, the emancipation here is that they did it through housing design, because all of these women, they and there were women architects before them, not exactly with the title of the architect. So the female option was decoration and scenography. So they were designing furniture and stages and I mean and clothing, fashion design. I mean, but then I think with this organization in a movement, in women's movement, they managed to claim like officially architecture education, architecture, the architectural profession, I mean, the practice, and be respected as practitioners in the field, but also as what was called as intellectual creators.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was really wonderful to see this very well described examples, especially from an architectural point of view. I have a question regarding the period of time that we're talking about, which is more or less in parallel also with the Frankfurt experience by Ernest Meyer. So even in this case of Ernest Meyer, before designing Frankfurt, he worked for a series of projects which were quite similar in terms of scale and typology, because he did the signals which were very, let's say, suburban before, let's say, going on to the long signals of Frankfurt. And at the same time, when he was collaborating with Margaret Liowski, that we are presenting in this image, she designed also a series of prototypes for professional women, which would be that she kind of categorized through the scale of the income. So she did this kind of low income dwellings, middle income, and so on, which were supposed to be for this figure that was kind of arisen at the time of the professional, let's say, top back there, or the freelance, let's say, especially middle class workers like teachers, so very professional workers. So my question is that, do you think that there was any relationship between these projects that you showed, this experience, and the work that came after in Germany, especially in the projects of Margaret Liowski, and in the projects of the other cities like Frankfurt, including Frankfurt, Berlin as well? Because I know that there were also many projects for housing for women only, and a series of projects that were trying also to address the presence of single women at the time. So I was wondering if there was a dialectic between these two experiences.
I guess not direct. I'm pretty sure that especially Winkelmann, because of the reputation she was especially at this point very accomplished, and after this project she was even invited to design housing even in Austria, in Vienna, so beyond the borders. So her designs, because then she was specializing in housing design, her designs certainly, I think, influenced later apartment design. And just as a disclaimer, I don't want by any chance to diminish Schulte-Lihotzky as a feminist or anything. It's just it's a entirely different context within which she operated. And if I should put it into words, I would say that the examples that I examine, they were addressed more in terms of experimentation and exploration, actually, of the potential that housing, or what housing for women could be. Whereas then in the following decade, in the 20s, it was addressed more in terms of standardization and optimization. It was already, I mean, the major decisions were already made, and it was about optimizing.
I have to say that I made a mistake while presenting your research, because I said the Weimar, I refer to the Weimar period, but this is pre-Weimar period.
It's the early Weimar Republic. It's still Weimar period, but even that, the fact that we have as Weimar period is established from 20s onwards, this is part of the problematic that I'm presenting here, that there is a period before that, which I think was richer in experimentation, whereas in the 20s, because of course of the political situation after the war, there was of course excessive housing need, and the state needed to respond to it quite immediately and massively, and there was no room for much experimentation there, but it was part of the agenda that was applied afterwards that reverted to the nuclear family apartment type. I mean, the Frankfurt program and the famous examples designed also in Berlin and elsewhere, they were along these lines. The decisions were made, and it was a question of how to optimize and standardize. Even here, Lihotzky doesn't really question that the woman is the operator of the kitchen. So, this is the main. So it's making the kitchen design optimum for a woman.
And what is the role of the state in this? Is the state supporting this project?
Not necessarily. As I said, it took it was necessary that let's say the social policy was let's say reinforced through the formation of cooperatives that as a body, as an institutional body that could claim benefits such as land donations, or let's say cheaper land, or other types of financial support. Like, as I said, only through membership, the cooperative could not survive. And in order not to increase the rent and go against the social policy, they had to ask money from national pension funds. And they got money. But it took this collective organization and yes, and activism, so to speak.
Yes.
Is it any requesting to kind of, the only other thing I can think of is the big enrich as kind of like housing for women outside of the community.
I'm sorry, which one?
The big enrich.
Okay, I have.
As sort of housing for women outside of the familiar. Are there any discussions that you can think of prior to the house? A house space.
As I showed, even the first decade of it's in the very beginning, the first decade of the 20th century was also quite rich in experiments. In fact, one of my key readings from which I borrowed the title, in this key reading, the two authors, they somehow map what happened in Germany, even from the 19th century and the transition. So women at the beginning were claiming activities outside the house. They claimed financial independence. Then came somehow a sort of professionalization that or let's say professional courses offered to women, but still could not be given in an institution like a university because women were not yet admitted. So they happen in these workers' homes, women's workers' homes. Yes, but not really. At the beginning, it was not so much about the architecture and the typology. It was just about almost like a club that women would go to get even shoeing lessons or home economics, because still they need to justify that they're not organizing any rebellion anytime soon. And yes, or like this one. For example, this one is from the Martha Maria Heim, is from 1905. but they justified their existence not as much as as women's homes or cooperatives of any sort. It was even as homes for women to spend their free time, and at the same time, let's say, be a bit creative, or but not really as, you know, outspoken argument about women's housing. Yes.
Yeah, that was a very good.
Thank you.
But I'm curious to learn. I mean, as you mentioned, the boarding houses were one of the examples that I became before. The House of the Sonne also kind of, I mean, that form of living. And I'm also thinking monasteries. I mean, a lot of women in their late age were actually, I mean, when they didn't have any other choice in life, they would end up becoming nuns. Or part of a monastery. But all these structures have very strict social rules and everyday, in their everyday life. And I was wondering whether some sort of rules existed in the House of the Sun. I mean, if the inhabitants, or if you happen to know any stories of everyday life.
That's an interesting question. I had it myself. Unfortunately, because the building still somehow exists. It has undergone major changes, but still exists in Potsdam, Berlin, and I visited it. But unfortunately, the archive that was kept in there was burned in the war. Or I mean, there's no archive to let's say, to be able to trace women or the stories of women that actually lived there. What I can just assume from the architect's, let's say, vision and descriptions is that she wanted these women to have all options available. And that's why I mean, for example, nowadays we tend to think that, let's say, communal kitchens is a must when it comes to, and it might be, but at this point, the architect really wanted to offer women the option to be able to prepare a small meal in their own, let's say, in their private space, but also be able to share a meal outside. To be able to cook, but to also to avoid cooking. An option to be close to nature, but also somehow not excluded from the city. So I think the architect was trying to create a platform for women that could enjoy both solitude and togetherness without being forced to either of it. And I, based on the let's say on the records that it was successful, and then in the 20s there was a second house at the to another corner of the site, but then it was destroyed in the war. It didn't survive. No, it was shut down, and then it exists today. It's completely transformed. It's private apartment building. It's nothing like completely transformed. Yes, unfortunately, as I said, also with the feminist publications, 1933 already was the gravestone for the feminist movement.
Only Germany, you think also elsewhere, in a way, you could argue, if I understood well your narrative, that this is a period of experimentation. But then, I mean, okay, besides fascism, which of course has very conservative mentality about women, but you could argue even the welfare state somehow was certainly rejecting all these experiments and was geared more towards a kind of traditional role of women.
To be honest with you, I don't think that the welfare state even went to this depths as to even examine the role of the woman. I think these programs that even the pre-war, the programs of the 20s, but then also the post-war programs, I think they established another successful, let's say, legacy or tradition for housing which then following generations did not question. They just adopted, and with these, let's say, frameworks that we know that Germany created for the production of housing, and later in the EBAs and all the exhibitions, they somehow never really radically or fundamentally, I think, questioned the structure of the nuclear family as the social unit. And of course, I think in the decades and in the years, perhaps women could find like alternatives, not designed. I mean, but at this point in history, women, it was a matter of survival. They didn't have any other option if they were single or without an income.
About typology and the fact that there were multiple branches of a similar project in Cologne and Hamburg. I was wondering what was the kind of multiplying potential of this typology, and that in the subsequent decade there were more examples of a similar kind of conflict elsewhere in different cities. And also during the war period, I guess women were most of the workforce. So I was wondering if there was any pushback as to having more of this offer available in the subsequent decade, even as you said, that's the housing offer.
Again, unfortunately, I started my vision when I started this research, even in the proposal, was to actually juxtapose the 1910s to the 20s, but this research ended up being so rich that I dropped the comparison thing and I delved into that. So unfortunately, I cannot really speak too much about the 20s. But of course, what I know, because many books try to trace this women in the profession history. So of course, there were women architects and more dominant in the 20s and in the 30s. And based on the accomplishments of these women and their hard work, they were more free to more free to even be commissioned such projects and be assigned and be trusted with these projects. What I know for sure is that these experiments, they were so successful that they were immediately, like the next year, there was a sister settlement in Hamburg or in Cologne. But unfortunately, I don't know what happened with them. I guess most of them were short-lived, I mean, until the war. And then, as I said, let's say the housing narrative was addressed in different terms, completely different terms. And I must say that based on the male reviews that I wrote about the women's house in the Werkbund exhibition, most men in the profession were not very happy with women getting so much attention and so many commissions, and so it's partly they are to blame for not, I mean, getting or going forward with such a let's say alternatives. I mean, it's not just that they did not become the canon, is that they completely vanished. So
yes.
Presentation. I wanted to ask you something about the House of the Sonne in the time. I don't know, because it struck me this form for the caretaker on the side. You know, I wondered. Yes. So let's say the housing plan, the main one is quite, I could say it's close to the very urban housing schemes. And there is this addition on the side with the curb, the only almost ornamental 1% of the body. And I wonder if they attempted to make this reproduction more visible, or if there was anything in the discourse that went in that direction.
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm not really sure. I mean, the architect herself doesn't really justify this choice or this decision. And as for the program, it's still an extra. I mean, in the ground floor, it's the kitchen attached to the main dining hall, but in the upper floors, it's an apartment, and then it's the roof. So it's 2 floors instead of 3 floors in this extension. I think it was just Winkelmann's approach to design as having these modulating planes, like not just the modernist, let's say, horizontality. And she played in most of her projects. She played with the roof lines and the different, let's say, sort of towers framing like a main building. She did that with this pavilion as well. This
constraint
appendix.
I mean, almost a kind of really like joke. But in a way, it seems to me maybe the interpretation that she wants to make clear that is the place of professional domestic labor, and as if it shouldn't be naturalized within the house. In a way, it should be these weird objects, protruding from the house. I don't know, that could be unconscious. Because it's very, I mean, yes, not way. I mean, there is a lot of, it's very Muctesius like move, because Muctesius was always emphasizing this very asymmetrical English houses like William Morris, So yes, exactly. But at the same time, you have this very symmetrical body, but then you have this little kind of attachment.
What I can say, because I was really interested in that project as well, but I couldn't find more material on it, unfortunately, because again, it was short-lived. It was demolished after the exhibition. That seems to be the destiny of women's work. And by studying her plans and her designs, I think that she also had like a strong classicist influence. So you can see here that, so she tried to somehow incorporate some elements, perhaps in this project, in the House in the Sun, she might even have thought of it as an appendix that might, for another extension or something to keep the design open to future changes. I don't know, as a bridge to something else. But yes, I think she has, from what I can understand, she has similar elements or similar thinking in her other designs also, in this one, I think.
Maybe if I continue on the point, for the pension fund, I find it quite interesting. It's true that the whole cooperative project in Germany also start to emerge because the pension fund actually gathers workers' money that can be made available for workers' housing. And I wondered if the women pension funds, or if there were such a pension funds for women, probably no, it was the state's interest altogether. If the financing came specifically from like a women's association, or some pension funds that were specifically dedicated to women, or how?
No, these were two different sources. Women's associations. I guess they raised funds from these exhibitions and these events, the fairs they held, by selling women's products in these fairs. I mean, that's one part. And other option is that still that money was not enough, and they asked for pension funds. They were not for women. It was mixed, like pension funds, but it was based, I think, on the precedent. That's why it is important to set precedents, because then based on that, this like a movement can evolve. So based on the successful precedent of the home for teachers in Pankow, it was women teachers, but of course they asked pension funds from teachers in general. So some of this, so for that one, they asked again, and I don't know which exact, whose workers' pension funds went to that scheme, but they were granted. They were granted.
I would maybe just the last, maybe the.
But not, I'm sorry, but it's important. It was not money given as charity. That's the innovation there. It was as part of the social policy that the cooperative was putting forward.
There was a question on the Weimar Republic, the transition on the Weimar Republic, and maybe there is, I mean, I didn't go in that specific thing, but studying a little bit something about it. There is maybe also the whole issue of the war debt that was so huge.
The coalition?
The debt of the war, because Germany lost, or was among the losing side. That made it so hard to maybe reinvest in housing as quickly, or at least not really seen like the possibility.
Dedication.
While the right of vote was granted to women, but so maybe it normalized this so differently in their situation.
Yeah, so your question is if there was actually investment to housing after the war?
I mean, in a way, you already answered that question.
No, actually, to be honest, because I haven't really studied what happened after the war, only from the knowledge I have and from what I've seen, what I've studied, like in the history of German housing, is that there was investment because there was, as I said, an urgent need for housing after the war, exactly because Germany was on the loser's side. But not in any form of experimentation. It was just massive production, optimization, and also it was a way to bring back the economy on its feet as a boost to the industry. So.
No, not in addition to this wonderful material we have presented, I'm curious to know if then just during your archival research, you come across any documents that actually say how long this reign, say there are how many there were, especially in the politics. I mean,
for the House in the Sun, because as I said, the pavilion was short-lived. It was taken down after the exhibition. So as I said, there are records, or I found records in the archives that or articles about the home and how successful it was, and the extension in 1926 and 27. And then I think gradually towards the year, as I said, the 1933, when it was closed. But yes, it was already successful, and it had a second extension in the side. Yes. So
approximately how many actual number?
I know the number of apartments, which is 14, and they range from 1 to 3 rooms. So I guess I would reckon double the number, like 28 women or 30 women. Something like
that. How much do you see this kind of as a combination of
this whole movement of the conceptualising pedagogy starts that places women as educators for the first time. So you speak a lot about retiring teachers, female campus, but in the sense that makes me think that it's quite unique to Germany, but it's a vertical for the whole kindergarten movement and pedagogy with women as mothers and teachers that is new because with Rousseau you have the idea of men as educators, so it's antagonizing a certain French enlightenment thinking of education, which is something men should do. So in a way, I feel like this is kind of like a combination of that, of this new generations of female educators that are finding, starting to I don't know if you explore that, but it's an interesting, specifically German phenomenon.
No, it's interesting. What I can say is that I think at this point in time, and I was impressed of how professional these women were with addressing the and expanding the movement, and how seriously they took also the education. I mean, they, as I said, they saw this pedagogical reform, this the education as the instrument, as the vehicle to whatever came next. And for example, I think it had a strong symbolic aspect. The Pestalozzi Frobel house, that was this school, they had hired Emily Winkelmann to design their, let's say, headquarters before they commissioned the cooperative housing projects. And the building also still stands today. I mean, many of Winkelmann's projects still stand today in the city of Berlin. Also, a great building for girls' dormitories, student dormitories for women. And this was a symbolic act that their building was designed by a woman, and then, you know, advocating for this to have a presence in the urban public realm. And it also within there was again a press project that published their own newspaper, which and today they host the archive, the Pestalozzi Frobel archive, where, I mean, I was not able to visit it because it was under restoration or something, but the legacy lives on. And I mean, this is important, I think. Also the Lyceum Club that commissioned a project to Winkelmann, they commissioned her first to design their own building. So this was a kind of a statement in the city of Berlin.
I was just wondering, in your plan of the houses of the sun, in the plan, there's some houses with the kitchenette outside of the bedroom and some with the kitchenette in the bedroom. And because it's in a cooperative setting, I was wondering, was it common for women to live maybe in the same bedroom or those with the kitchenette? As like, if you compare with clusters nowadays, often the bedroom with the kitchen is for a small couple or something like that. I know that it was maybe not explicitly said back then, but was it common to maybe partner up or to team up to buy parts in cooperative and buying a bedroom and living in that bedroom together?
Absolutely. I didn't find this information, but I bet that there might be perhaps a variation in the price between like the 1 bed and the 2 bed and the 3 bed apartments. And there is an effort. I mean, this is really for me a predecessor of housing, because there is this, you know, the stair core, and then there's the effort to organize the program like a core, like on the symmetrically, and allow these lodges and this, let's say, sort of balconies for the rooms, or distribute the rooms one at the side of the other, and somehow when she could not fit in these appliances to fit them in the opposite side. I know that the membership was the same for all, but perhaps there was a variation in the price, and perhaps some women would like to share. It was planned by the architect. I don't know if there was any internal, reorganization, like the removal of a partition or something. But because I was lucky enough that the original drawings and the description from the architect still is. I mean, I read the drawings and documents. They are kept in a service for the protection of monuments in Potsdam in Berlin, and she describes the number of rooms and everything. So I think this is what she had in mind, like a gradient of togetherness or individuality.
About your treatment into the evolution of the event, partially as to doing the food prior to being allowed and why she
knows how she managed to sneak in the school, because officially she could not be admitted. She perhaps attended the courses, but and then I think in the meantime in her studies, perhaps there was the year when women officially were admitted, but still she could not officially have the degree. And she just, I think at some point, because she started her own office, she just dropped the school, but she had attended courses, so we can say that she had, she received higher education, only not formally. I don't know if she dressed up as a man or cut her hair, I don't know that.
Okay, Ioanna, thank you very much.
Thank you.